Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Turnup. Thank you all for joining in. Thank you to the 150. We appreciate you so much, and we are so excited to jump on another interview. I would say, though, that this week isn't as, I don't want to say entertaining because it's a lot of terrible things have happened in the world, but definitely newsworthy, breaking news as the last few weeks have been. But there's still a lot of really, really important things going on in the world that we definitely feel should be covered. So before we get started, please like, please share, please subscribe to this channel. Please tell all your friends. Join us on Patreon. You can really help the channel survive, keep going, whatever word you want to use, and help us grow. CK, you ready to jump in?
I'm ready, MR. Quit watching The Bear. Quit watching Squid Games. I know that's all you're doing, but listen to some real news with the Daily Turnup.
Yeah, that's real. BG, you ready to do this?
MR, CK, thank you again for having me. It's a fantastic day to be here. Really excited to get into it with you guys and see what's going on in the world.
Awesome. Let's do it. So we really have three main topics we want to get to, and hopefully we don't go down too many rabbit holes. So the first one, we're kind of discussing what we wanted to get into, and we definitely want to talk about the Supreme Court ruling. We definitely want to talk about the U.S., Israel, and Iran. But we felt that one of the biggest things happening right now, at least when you go onto the news, is that the Democratic New York City mayor primary completed. I think it was Thursday night, maybe it was Friday night, and the winner is Mo Donmi. And he's pretty much taking the internet by storm, and people are either incredibly excited or they're absolutely terrified, mainly because he's a Muslim socialist. At least that's how the right is branding him, and that's scaring a lot of people. So before I pass over to you, BG, let me just give a quick recap of what this guy is all about. So things that he wants to do. He wants to freeze rent for stabilized tenants. He wants to build 200,000 permanently affordable rent stabilized homes. He wants to raise minimum wage to $30 an hour by 2030, increase taxes on corporations and high-income earners, provide free city bus services, create universal childcare, open 5 city-run grocery stores, one in each borough, allocate $65 million to transgender healthcare services, and establish an office for LGBTQIA plus affairs. I'm actually pretty stoked I was able to get that without slurring. And then, why are people against him? So there's overall concerns about public safety. Critics argue his plan to shift funding from police to mental health and violence interpreter programs could lead to a mass exodus of NYPD officials in raising crime. One of the things that he has run on is defunding the police. So that's making a comeback. At age 33, he has a very short resume, and opponents say he lacks the executive background needed to manage New York City's massive bureaucracy and budget. Also, socialist alarm bells are going off. He's branded by opponents, including Trump and other Republicans, as a far-left socialist, or dare I say communist, stirring fear that his policies are anti-American, anti-capitalist. And then finally, just overall questions about how financially feasible this is going to be. He wants to do a lot of things with money, and it just involves taxing the rich. It's basically his plan to do that. So, BG, why should New Yorkers be excited? Why should they be terrified? Why is this amazing? Why is this terrible? What are your thoughts?
MR, fantastic overview, first of all.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
I
only slurred twice.
Yeah, I apologize. Mamdani, I think is his name, and I apologize to the world if I am mispronouncing that. So, things that are exciting. Attempting to fix your housing situation in New York City, which has an outlandish cost of living, higher in some cases than that of Tokyo, Japan, is insane. Fixing your bus and transit system, arguably a nice positive as well. City-owned grocery stores for helping out those who are struggling to afford groceries could arguably be a good thing as well. Tax hikes on wealthy and corporations, there's always the trade-offs of is that going to push people out or not, but in general, that'll help drive some of the additional revenue, which would help him with the massive pieces that he's trying to put in play here. And then what was the last thing you said? The police force
Defunding the police.
Defunding the police. Yeah, I don't know. New York City has so many people. I mean, we tried this in the 80s and 90s. It didn't work out so well. You had people getting stabbed left and right on MTA, New York City subways. So, but okay, so let's go through it line by line. So first, let's talk rent. So I think the big problem with trying to rent freeze in any capacity in New York, and this is a problem they have all over the place, is that it disincentivizes developers and housing groups to create new housing because they already have a supply problem. Because if they feel that there's going to be rent freezes or stricter regulations, they'll choose not to build, or they'll choose to not maintain buildings so that they can have additional tenants, right? Because it's just going to add additional problem to their already crazy supply shortage. Further, it's already extremely expensive for companies to continue to do property maintenance and maintain quality in the city as it stands.
So with that being said, I also saw that he wants to raise taxes in general to match New Jersey. So I believe New York was at 7.5 or 8.5%, and he wants to raise it to the New Jersey standard of 11.5%.
11.5, yes. That it's going to have implications for companies, definitely. So your two primary risks there that I would say are risk of capital and talent leaving, which they kind of saw previously, I think, in 2019.
Would they leave to go to a different American city, or would they leave the country
Absolutely.
as a whole?
Nope. They would just relocate, right? So you're seeing a ton of these hedge funds and venture capital firms doing a mass exodus outside of New York and instead going to West Palm Beach in Florida,
I
or
was about
going
to
to
say, I heard
places like
Miami's like the
Dallas.
spot right now.
Exactly, or Dallas in Texas, right? So I could foresee that definitely happening in the future, just because it's gonna help them drive down their operational costs over time, right? And then the other piece is they generally have income tied to markets specifically, which fluctuate, which means that the revenue perspective for them could actually be more volatile over time, right? So it's one of those plus minus perspectives, right? And London just had this exact problem, I think, in 2018, and they had close to 10,000 millionaires leave London because of this specific.
Yeah,
problem.
how do you, and CK, you can jump in here too, is how do you bring in socialism, and maybe communism is too strong of a word, I have to do more research to see if he's really on the communist line, in the most capitalistic city in the world? Like, I just feel like the two fundamental ideologies cannot coexist. To BG's point about potentially all these people leaving and not in New York no longer being developed.
You don't. You see West Berlin, East Berlin, and if you saw the production and the types of cars and everything from the capitalist versus the socialist or communist, I mean, it was night and day. You can't, right? That's the power of capitalism. Is you can say there's inequalities, but in terms of sheer production and innovation and things like that, capitalism wins the day.
Yeah. So BG, what other fears are there? What fears do you think are legitimate that maybe for the first time, since Giuliani, a Republican actually take over the mayorship in New York?
Mhm. You mean it with respect to Mandami specifically having?
Yeah. Like, what are his weaknesses that the Republicans are going to use to exploit to basically say, hey, we cannot go with him?
Oh, fundamentally, it's going to be anything tied to this socialist framework that you've already provided, right? It's everything that the GOP has decided is no longer tied to the DNC perspectives today, right? The police aren't here to help us and actually maintain law and order, law enforcement, right? It's going to be everything tied to what we were just talking about, rent freezes. I didn't even get into the bus and transit system, which is already usually over budget in New York, but
Yeah.
that'll be another big part of it. City-owned grocery stores, it's already what you have to understand about grocery retail. It's one of the lowest margin businesses that exists in the entire economy and economic sector.
Like
Oh,
2%.
really?
Yes. And so ultimately, if you attempt to have the government run that, think of like the Postal Service of the United States running a grocery store, right?
Every government entity, the military.
Yes, it's what you saw happen in the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union became Russia, right? Effectively, almost overnight. It's extremely high cost, and it's going to be extremely hard to scale it, even with only 5 stores being run by the government. I don't see them being effective or efficient. Further,
So what do those stores even mean? Like, you can walk in that grocery store and all the food is free because the government's paying for it?
No, I
So
think
if I price control, there's no profit margin, so the stores aren't profiting, and you're only paying exactly what it costs. But because how
Oh,
inefficient the government is, the
it costs more.
it will cost more even without a profit margin, because there's not
Correct.
that much of a profit. It's a 2% profit margin.
Oh, okay. So I think I'm with hopefully half our listeners where this kind of went over my head the first time. So basically, the government is going to run a grocery store. It's going to cost significantly more than if the Walmart or Target
it's
portion of a
government.
grocery store, because they're so efficient. They're so locked in. They have the best deals with farmers and manufacturers and everything. The bloated government's going to come in and just F it all up.
Further, yes, to CK's point exactly, municipal grocery stores risk distorting the entire food market in general, right? Which ultimately drives out those small businesses to exactly what CK was talking about. If you're not talking Walmart, Target, Kroger, Publix, insert grocer here, ultimately it drives out those mom and pop shops that are running in these different boroughs and neighborhoods. Now,
So what
granted,
is the
it is
argument
only
for this? Why would anyone think this is a good idea?
to deliver lower cost goods to people who are struggling to afford it in general.
Oh, is this one of those, in theory, this is better, but in
In theory,
reality,
it
this
is
is a dumb idea?
correct. Yes.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Dude, I'm connecting the
Absolutely.
dots. Let's go.
Yeah. Yes. So I think those are the big pieces that they'll take away and say, hey, these are problematic. With the police, we've tried this in every U.S. city where you defund the police, you ultimately have more crime. So I don't see how that'll be a good thing in any capacity, which regardless of which side of the aisle you lean. So those are
Yeah, I know in
BJ's
2020,
takes.
defunding the police, that's where it really took off. And all the cities where they actually defunded the police, things got significantly worse. And instead, it's like, hey, let's invest into the right training for the police. So if we see a high level of police brutality or whatever, let's train that out and focus on the things that the police need to do. And guys, please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, I have not seen police brutality in the news in like 2 years at least. I mean, every now and then, I mean, something pops up, humans suck and humans make mistakes. But for the large majority, I haven't seen in the news in years.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Now it's the anti-ICE stuff, but that's because it's predominantly tied to Trump and his policies, right?
Sure, but that's new. That's
Whatever.
only since like January. But like
Yes.
even before that, when Biden was president, like I didn't see anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, clearly it's an agenda driven. Let me write a narrative that this is happening so I can get voters and funding and all the other things to drive policy.
Which to that exact point, MR and CK, is hysterical to me because Democrats previously were complaining about egg prices for Americans and how DJT took over and it wasn't helping anything. And I think it's so ironic that you now have someone in New York who's willing to try to start their own grocery system that's city owned and operated that will have the exact same problem.
But the egg prices are at a very a 4-year low. They're extremely low now, so it's not in the narrative. No one's talking about it. Why? Because it doesn't fit
Doesn't fit the agenda.
the argument in the
Right.
agenda. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting. So with all this being said, and our listeners obviously know that we do not lean socialist or communist at all, so they probably think we're somewhat biased, and that's fair. We're definitely not communists on this channel, to say the least. But CKBG, does this dude have a legit shot at winning? And is he just playing off people's ignorance and like, oh, this sounds great, and they can't connect the dots like I was 10 minutes ago? I'm like, oh, whoa, someone just explain this, and this is a really, really dumb idea.
MR, let me paint you a rosier picture of.
All right, let's hear it.
Mamdani. I agree with everything BG said. Yet, there's always a but.
Sure, let's hear it.
The NYC Democrat mayoral debate. One of the questions that popped up, and I think I
know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah,
exactly what you're going to say.
But if you ask me, like, when did he go viral, and like what won him this primary? It was this question. It was what country would you visit first as the mayor of New York?
Adrian
question. Adams. Yeah, it's a dumb question to ask, and the answers were even dumber. Adrian Adams, I would visit the Holy Land. Andrew Cuomo, given the hostility and anti-Semitism that has been shown in New York, I would go to Israel. Brad Lander, Israel. Ramos, Israel. Myrie, Israel. Over and over, Israel. Zoran Mamdani, I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that. So who is the most MAGA candidate of all? I think it's the commie. Make America great again. I'm serious. If you care about yourself and your life in Israel, why am I focused on visiting the Holy Land? Even if I care about the Jews in New York. And he addressed that. He said, I plan to meet the Jews where they're at, in the New York Jews where they're at in New York. Why do I need to go to Holy Land to meet their issues here?
That's a fair point. And to
It
that
is.
point too, dumb question. And one, I think we all agree that the Democratic Party is lost beyond all hope. And they're just so fundamentally flawed and so unbelievably dumb that they've been able to fumble every opportunity that they've had post-Obama, this being one of them. And this specifically, CK, reminds me of politicians getting elected because they had some of the best one-liners. Ronald Reagan had probably the most famous one-liner when his opponent was trying to make fun of him because of his age, and Ronald Reagan's like, I will not bring age into this to say that my opponent doesn't have any experience. Trump, one of the reasons Trump beat Hillary is because he made the line about putting her in, or she'd be in jail, and all of her donors, manipulate the tax code, which is why she never fixed it. Right? It's moments like you just explained, CK, that change political fortune. And maybe that moment right there is the reason why he's going to bring his policies into New York City.
But MR, I'll go a step further, right?
I'm sure you will.
It's the most democratic, maybe arguably the most democratic city in the United States. So obviously,
no, it's not. DC is by far.
Sure. Oh, okay. Sorry. Top 5. Can we?
Yeah. Definitely.
Arguably top 5. So it's a very left-leaning, city in general. So they're going to lean to these agendas. But like people are, it's funny because even the liberals are leaning toward make America great. And that greatness, we might interpret that in a different way. We might interpret that in, rich pay their fair share and things like that. And
they got the blue hats now.
But they still care about, like, why are we focused on a different country instead of us? No new wars. Like, liberals have the same argument. Why are we worried about foreign affairs when we can't even take care of our own cities? So I think just the idea of, like, you saying something other than New York City, it's a mistake.
Yeah, it's like a trick question, and they all fell for it.
I equate this to Animal Farm, George Orwell. If you haven't read it,
great book, man.
It's such a good book. But when we're talking about who is Cuomo, right? He is Napoleon the Pig at the end of the book. Like, the guy that's like, who promised everything, and then who did he turn out to be? He turned out to be worse than the farmers, right?
Yeah.
He became the authoritarian that he said he would, he rose the rebellion and everything else. But
you're supposed to defeat the Sith, not join them.
Yeah. And who is Mamdani? He's the pigs at the beginning, right? We see him, like, people ideologically see him as the way forward. Maybe he's the guy to change the establishment. The establishment, both sides, Republican and Democrat, right now, there's a war against the establishment. And if you are anti-establishment, you're in right now. And Mamdani, for better and for worse, he's anti-establishment. And that is in right now, because what has the establishment done for us lately? Nothing. They've lined their own pockets, Democrat or Republican, Mitch McConnell or Andrew Cuomo or whoever else in between.
No, I think that was a great take. Do you guys have any closing comments before we move on to the next one?
Yes, Amar, I'll just say this.
Go for it.
So the risk with New York, to CK's point about the fact that it's the most democratic area, yes, completely agree. In the last election in 2021 between Eric Adams and Curtis, whatever his name was, Sliwa or whatever, I'll probably never get that name correct. Mm-hmm. He won 67% of the vote. So to CK's point, it's 100% certainty that this guy is going to get elected when it goes up. So that's what I'll say.
I won't give it 100%. Trump did very well in New York comparatively to other Republicans.
Yeah, but that's a presidential election. I'm talking with respect to the mayoral election.
Yeah, but New York is I would give it. I mean, I see what you're saying. I still think there's like a 95%.
There's only
when
one.
Is the election?
I don't know.
Can someone just like Google it real quick?
Yeah, I got you.
I can tell you this, though. The only borough that even leans partially red is going to be Staten Island. So it's just not even, it's just not tenable in my mind that any sort of Republican will have capability.
Trump beat Hillary. All things are possible, right? Biggest update.
Election November 4th, 2025.
All right, what's that? 4 months away? 1 month away? Yeah, about 4 months. We're almost in July. Okay. All right, cool. No, I like it. All right, let's move on to USA, Iran, Israel. What's next? What happened since our last episode? And I do want to say, before we move on, I completely called it. I was 100% right. CK was wrong. I predicted the response. I should be on Paul and Market making bets, and I'd be a millionaire right now. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, enough gloating. So on June 22nd, the U.S. executed Operation Midnight Hammer, deploying B-2 stealth bombers and submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, the biggest one being Fordo. U.S. and Israeli officials claim severe, widespread destruction. President Trump called it a complete obliteration, and IAEA head confirmed enormous damage. And what happened next? And then Iran launched retaliatory missile strikes against Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar on June 23rd, and United States Patriot Air Defense smacked that shit out of the sky, protecting the boys, protecting American assets. Excuse me. So basically, United States went in.
Too.
Yeah, right. Maybe went in, destroyed the nuclear facilities, and now that's being questioned. So, CK, I'm going to turn it over to you, but let me preference this, right? There's a lot of information being challenged right now, right? There's a whole argument, hey, what was actually destroyed? How much damage? How far was the nuclear capability setback? Then there's the whole narrative like, hey, these Americans that did the bombing run, flew 36 hours, they're defenders, that entire military group that executed everything that had to be executed, are they getting the credit they deserve, or is the left just pushing them down? And then what does that mean next for the U.S., Iran, and Israel? So I gave you a lot there. I'll let you pick what you want to talk about.
Yeah, let's start with, if you want to look at the glass half empty point of view, right? Maybe we put them back a couple months because it seems like they brought a bunch. The media is saying they brought a bunch of trucks in, and most of their uranium and things that matter were moved out of the sites beforehand. And so the media and Iran are arguing that at most we push them back a couple months. The Trump administration, as well as Tulsi Gabbard, is saying no. What they did with their trucks that moved in, they put in concrete slabs, and the first bunker buster bombs of like the 12 that were dropped were to eliminate those concrete slabs, and then the rest of the bombs came in and destroyed. And so they're 5 years put back or whatnot. So who knows who's telling the truth? The truth, I usually believe the truth is somewhere in between, because you have two sides spinning. The truth is probably somewhere in between. But Iran, right, what was their retaliation? It was to forewarn the U.S. and Qatar that, hey, we're going to strike with these many missiles at this site, and this is what's going to happen, giving plenty of time for U.S. air defense to blow it out of the sky. We can all clap, and we should clap, right? Because no easy feat to hit a missile with another missile. Hitting a bullet with another bullet is not as it's rocket science to its highest degree. but there's always a but, right? Like, when the enemy is telling us that it's coming, is it really a retaliation, or is it, it's de-escalatory in nature, right?
Exactly.
And so what could we argue is that we maybe put them back 3 to 5 months. They gave us, a forewarning and then shot a couple missiles, and then we all shook hands and went home. So how much money, how many billions of dollars in missiles did we waste, and bomber runs and bombs and this and that, just for us to all put on a nice little show to say we were enemies and now we're friends? It seems little sus, as my kids would say. They're old enough now to say that, to say sus. They think they're hip. I think I'm hip too. I agree. It's a little sus, right?
Well,
we're all shaking hands and kissing babies and saying we did our part. And meanwhile, who's doing the part? It's the taxpayers paying money for these bombs.
All right, BG, I'll let you hit this. CK, I got to stop you there. I don't buy that money argument at all. I think that is the weakest straw man argument of all time. And BG, I'll let you address everything else. And the reason is where's that money really going, right? The money's going to disappear in the defense budget anyways. It doesn't matter whether they're doing a training exercise and burning fuel. Everyone that executed the mission was already getting paid on salary. It's not like they're working overtime or they're getting paid for anything like that. The fuel is already going to be used.
Those missiles, MR.
They're always going to get replaced, or they're going to restockpile at some point. Those missiles, those bombs, everything is manufactured to be used. And CK, if they are not used within its life cycle, they're going to blow them up anyways, and that all that money was for nothing. So at least they used it not in a training site or not in demo. At some point, those were not going to exist. So that entire money argument, I think, is straw man. I heard all over the news, which is why I'm a little triggered, because I'm like, that's not an argument. That is
But they
silly.
will be replaced, won't they?
All of them will be replaced.
Now,
every single one. They were always going to be replaced at some point.
And who pays for it?
It's already all accounted for. That money's going to get spent no matter what. And at least it's being spent on something.
The missiles were already getting shot all at once?
No, I don't know what you're saying. No, if the missiles weren't used in their life cycle, they're going to be detonated, and then all that text matter was just blown up for nothing. I don't know. Actually, someone just Google what the life cycle of the missile is. I don't know, maybe 5-10 years. I really don't know.
I think it's probably 10 years, and then there's an option to refurbish. So we're saying, like, yeah, they'll be replaced anyways within a 15-year span. But we shot them all in 1 year, in 1 day, in fact. And so just to say that we would have replaced them eventually.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying this argument's stupid. It's that they're going to be replaced, and it's part of the budget already. It's not like they're going over budget. It either means they'll spend something less, or they weren't going to make up some bullshit at the end of the year to get within budget.
Next year they will change the budget to account for these missiles. There is always a bill payer. I don't agree with your argument that we were going to pay the bill anyways. No, when we react, someone pays the bill.
Dude, if you look at a lens in the defense through the eyes of money, I think it's insanity. Every single divisional parade that's done, that was just $100,000. Every single training exercise, that was a substantial amount of money. Like, all right, we'll move on because this is like defeating the point we're getting in. I just think
these are different
such
arguments.
a wasted argument.
I agree with you. The parades and all those things are also a waste of money. Just to say, because we're wasting money in, sphere A, we can also waste money in sphere B.
I don't know the military budget inside and out. I would probably account for the fact that they have some missile usage built into the budget. I feel like that's a high probability.
One of our first podcasts, MR, I said, the U.S. budget and our debt is death by 1,000 cuts. All I'm saying is we're adding a cut, and I don't agree with adding cuts when we already have too many as it is.
Dude, you got to remind the world that American air power is the best in the business. Just think about it from that standpoint. The fact that we were able to go across the entire world, like half the world, opposite side of the world, and do what we did, that sends a message to effing everybody that we can strike you no matter what. Can you put a price on that, CK?
Yeah, I can't. Cost of the missiles, the fuel, the
so
bombers,
dumb. You're so dumb.
And the paycheck.
Nah, dude. But besides like the ability to do what they did, which was badass, it sends a message to everybody in the world that we can strike you no matter where you are and fear us. All right, BG. CK and I just went off on a tangent. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. MR, you guys, CK, wow.
I was triggered.
Yeah. To your point, MR, yes, you really need to tip your hat to the U.S. military on this one. I mean, really. Let's look at what's going on with the Russians in Ukraine, and let's look at what the Chinese are capable of. I'm using air quotes, capable of in the South China Sea. No one else has a bunker buster that weighs 30,000 pounds that can be flown all the way across the world, to your point, with strategic tankers and fighter jets all over, and then also have the Pentagon conduct a deception mission to send fighters and bombers the opposite direction, while also moving 2 carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf to prepare for strikes in Iran. I mean, it's remarkable. And then, okay, got it. Sorry, go ahead, CK.
No, and just, tip your cat to Hegseth for not leaking it to the Atlantic.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I'm glad I didn't see it on a signal chat.
Lessons learned.
Yeah, hilarious. And the fact that they didn't have any Pentagon leaks is actually pretty significant too for the GOP. I'll say that. The
Low bar.
Patriot, yeah, exactly. The Patriot battery in Qatar, yes, they were given a fair warning, but you gotta, I mean, to CK's point, yeah, look, you're hitting two kinetic objects that are flying through space at Mach 6 to 8, something like that, or if not faster. And the fact that you're hitting it with so much precision that nothing lands on the ground, absolutely remarkable. With respect to whether or not it did or didn't happen, I will say this. The Ayatollah will say whatever he needs to retain power, so
Sure. Yep.
Can be trusted for anything. I will also say I commend the Iranian foreign minister Abbas Araghchi or whatever his name is. He said it in an interview in the opposite of what the Ayatollah said. He said the level of damage is high and it is serious damage to the nuclear facilities.
Yep.
So the fact that this man came out and said the opposite of what the Ayatollah and saying what the IRGC are pushing out as propaganda across everything leads me to believe that we did do some level of damage. Whether or not we got rid of all the uranium, I don't know. I'm not a nuclear scientist.
Yeah.
I'd have to defer to
counter you. The
Atomic
DIA,
Agency.
Defense Intelligence Agency, came out and said we did at most 6 months pushing back because we didn't hit anything significant. We hit electrical wiring, and that was pretty much it. So, like, their guys, came out and said we did significant. Some of our guys, not all of our guys, said we didn't do anything too significant. So, like I said before, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just think that there are centrifuges and things that can't be replicated. So I don't think it was just wiring. I think it's probably worse than that. What ends up happening?
What's happening next year? What's next?
BG's take. I think it's going to lead to some level of regional escalation and proxy fallout. That Iran's going to threaten to move IRGC forces somewhere, whether that's in Syria again or Iraq, something. They need some way to be able to attack the Israelis regardless of the ceasefire. So that's going to happen. They will probably ask these militia proxies to conduct some sort of localized type strikes or continue disrupting shipping lanes like they were already doing. The Houthis were already doing. And then I think that ultimately it will lead to some level of diplomatic restart regardless of what DJT is saying and Iran is saying with respect to not wanting to pursue any sort of talks. I think some level of talks are going to happen. There's some level of diplomacy that's going to occur. Low confidence for this next part, but I think that internally, now that the military and IRGC have been weakened, I think that there might actually be a power struggle within the Iranian government. I think it's possible that moderate factions, guys like Peshkian or whatever his name was, may be able to push for some level of diplomacy and actually start retaining some levels of power to be voted into higher seats in the government. Having said that, I don't think that means anything for Ayatollah, and I don't think that there's any sort of regime change. But I do think, to CK's point, it'll start giving us some ability, and by us I mean the rest of the free world, some ability to have influence over who's running Iran.
No, good take. CK, what do you think is going to happen next?
I think both Israel and Iran would like to wait until they see who gets elected next in the United States, right? Whether that be Donald Trump, not.
You think they're going to wait 3 years before they do anything else?
No, that I was getting there. I think that's the initial goal, is to wait to see if the DNC wins or the GOP, like someone like JD Vance, or someone like Gavin Newsom or whomever. I don't think it's gonna last that long though, and I think something's gonna stir up again. I don't know who's gonna cause it. Both sides will point to each other because there'll probably be some underlying issues between the conflict. I don't think this chapter. I mean, maybe the chapter's ended, but the book's not over.
No, I think that's a good point, and I'm with you. If I'm going to make a prediction, which I'm almost perfect on this podcast, I'm going to make a prediction. But I'm not going to make a prediction here because for me right now, there's not enough information to kind of put to a point where I would make a prediction of what's going to happen next. BG, I agree with the points that you're making. We'll see. I don't know, but I But CK, I do think you're right. Like, I think this is a chapter ending. A new chapter will come, whether it comes in days, weeks, or months. This story is not yet over. All right, so let's pivot to our final topic, which might be our most important topic, or at least maybe one of the most newsworthy, and that is the Supreme Court ruling. So, on June 27th, 2025, the United States Supreme Court limited the power of lower courts to issue nationwide injunction blocking presidential policies, meaning they can now only block enforcement for the plaintiffs involved, not everyone across the country. This ruling rose from 3 emergency appeals against Trump's Executive Order 14160, which seeks to remove automatic U.S. citizenship from children born to non-citizen parents, illegal or temporary. Crucially, the court did not rule on whether the order is constitutional under the 14th Amendment, leaving the question unresolved. BG, take the lead here.
MR, there's a lot to cover with these different rulings. So, frankly, I'm like, where do we even start? You know, because now you've potentially changed fundamentally how injunctions are viewed across the entire United States, specifically to the plaintiff involvement. I think is interesting. That'll have jurisdictional implications. I'm not certain what that means with respect to the Constitution and the 14th Amendment, with respect to the birthright citizenship pieces. I have no idea what that's going to look like. I know there was something.
Do you at least agree with these? Do you think this was the right move? Do you think the Supreme Court felt that they had to because either Trump's president or that they saw things taken too aggressively, right? So one thing on birthright citizenship, what was happening for years, decades, very, very common knowledge is that Chinese tourists would come over 8 months pregnant, then they'd give birth to the United States. And they're like, hey, this kid now has citizenship, even though they're only here as a tourist. That is like a very known common thing, right? So you think instances like that force the Supreme Court's hand to finally make a decision with Trump being president?
Potentially. I'll say generally in a 6-3 ruling, you know, at that point it wasn't as close as you think it was, right? It wasn't a 5-4 type decision.
Sure.
So I'm inclined to think that it was actually constitutionally their obligation to ensure that lower courts were not affecting the president's power, regardless of who the president is.
And that's a great point to make, is that this will affect everyone moving forward and not just Trump.
Correct. With respect to the birthright citizenship piece, they didn't rule on that explicitly. So,
correct.
It remains to be seen what that looks like, right? I don't know if they let the lower appellate courts continue to take those cases and then try to push them back up through the Supreme Court. What does it actually look like? I understand that it is a significant immigration policy problem, but I just don't know what that looks like in terms of making a decision. On the other cases, I mean, there were a ton of other cases that also went through, had to do with families being able to pull their kids away from different LGBTQ type processes. There was transgender medical care. There's just so much that happened so quickly. I just don't even know. Yeah, I don't even know where to start on the other pieces.
So CK, where are you leaning on this? Because even when I see, lower courts are now limited, it kind of draws back to one of the episodes we did a few months ago when we talked about corruption in the judicial system, because they're being elected or not elected, but being put into positions of power either by Democrats or Republicans, and then that they kind of lean party ways. And it seems now that a lower level court in California can't stop what Trump is trying to do that's outside the state of California. So does it seem like, hey, this should always be the case because lower courts are abusing their power that are politically motivated, or did the Supreme Court make a mistake here?
Amar, everything has been completely flipped, right? Back when we did that episode, we talked about how every single executive order by the Trump administration, every single law, signed, could be challenged by a single court in a number of very liberal districts appointed by Biden or Obama or Clinton or whoever. So every single thing could just be, and the Supreme Court, like, who would ultimately rule over, what was the final decision. It would take years, just to get over like a handful of these.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if we're talking about hundreds of executive orders or laws or whatnot, like, it would be well past Trump's administration for these to be followed. So the judge in these local courts would really have the final say in most of these decisions, because by the time Trump's out of power, like, it doesn't get to the Supreme Court. They can only handle so many cases.
Yep.
The script has been flipped, right? Because now the local judges can make the ruling. It has no jurisdiction over any other place besides their local municipality. And so the Supreme Court can rule with the local judge eventually, but again, it's a timeline. The Supreme Court can only hear so many cases.
So with that being said, then, can only one judge rule on it at a time, or can Trump do a policy, half the judges that are in power rule against it then, or can only one judge put in that motion?
Well, all of these judges can rule, right? And it will affect their local municipality. But the Supreme Court picks and chooses, and I assume if they're all true, they'll pick one case, right? They pick a case, and before it goes from a local, it goes to an appellate, and then after the appellate, it goes to the Supreme, and they'll pick one case and they'll rule, and that becomes the law, right? That becomes the precedent from here on out. So instead of one local judge ruling for the federal, now it has to go to the Supreme Court before it gets ruled for the federal.
No, absolutely.
So birthright citizenship, while it wasn't ruled on, like, the Supreme Court didn't touch it, in effect, Trump's executive order saying birthright citizenship is not allowed is law until the Supreme Court rules against it. Which I think they will.
Unless a local judge says, "Hey, no,
not anymore." Now a local judge can say, "Hey, no," for this local appellate, but it's still the law for the entire rest of the country.
But can judges do the same thing? So can you have multiple judges throughout the country say no?
Yeah, but the strategy for the Democratic Party was that one judge needs to say it, and it applies for the whole country.
No, I know. But now does every single Democratic judges need to say it now? So maybe, what I'm getting at is that...
But then you need multiple cases in multiple locations, and that still will only apply to, like, we're talking about citywide. So if I have 12 judges, that only applies to 12 cities. Like, and
that's kind of what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is that our judges now essentially just going to be political parties, where if they disagree, we'll just use the current administration to make it easy, but it really doesn't matter who's president next, because the inverse, right? So if Trump puts out a policy that all Republicans agree with, therefore all Republican judges appointed are going to agree with it, then will you have every single Democratic appointed judge have to put in the motion at every single local level, which could be 400 or 500 different judges?
The attorneys general.
Sure, yeah.
There'd have to be a suit. The judges just rule over that suit. But I would argue, Mark, that has already been happening. The judges have already, and the attorneys general have already been politicized. Now we're just saying that one politicized judge and one politicized attorney general cannot control the law of the land. And I think that is correct and right and just, because we can't politicize one New York or Washington D.C. or Boston judge to control the law for the entire nation. So yeah, maybe you have Boston be politicized, but I would argue that the people of Boston were probably leaning that way anyways. So it's not really affecting the people who live there and their constituents.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So where do you think the decision, or where do you think we're going to go next when it comes to birthright citizenship? Like, do you think that'll actually get approved?
No.
And to what degree?
It will be ultimately shot down, I believe, by the Supreme Court. I have some faith in the Supreme Court in following, the Constitution of the United States. And you can say it's politicized. it is probably to some degree politicized, but I think ultimately they'll view that the 14th Amendment views that birthright citizenship is the law of the land, and it will be shot down. But again, that might take 2 years. Now, I think what's more interesting is that Amy Coney Barrett, her opinion piece against Justin Jackson's dissent, man, she like what's making the rounds is that like it was scathing. She pretty much says, did you even pass the bar? She said Justice Jackson skips over the part because analyzing the government statute involves boring legalese, saying like she just didn't really want to do the work. So the right is taking this and like it's a hit piece, like, oh, she's a DEI hire. Like that's the
shit.
argument that's all over the news, like because the argument did have like a little bit of like sass to it.
Yep.
It's the argument, and I'll say Barrett. Most MAGA Republicans have been like Barrett's a letdown, and she's fake. She's not actually MAGA, and yet she came here in this opinion piece, writing the opinion for the majority, saying that Jackson was not only wrong, but she was unqualified based on like the argument she made.
Damn, that's wild.
Yeah, effectively saying it had no constitutional basis. It's crazy.
Yeah,
dude. They have issues within the Supreme Court right now. They do not like each other. If that's being said,
I don't think that's happened.
Oh, I can't recall a time. Usually they're pretty civil, like this, as civil as it gets.
Well, you had RBG, right? Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you had Scalia. Apparently, they were best friends outside of the court, and they were like polar opposites of political beliefs, but they were very, very close in terms of like their relationship. And you're not so like I remember when we did that podcast about the courts, most of the comments were like, are you really saying that the courts are politicized? How dare you?
Oh yeah, I was like, what?
Like,
obviously,
yeah, they are.
Things that aren't surprising for 500, please.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez. One thing we didn't talk about, I know we're about to wrap up here. One thing we didn't talk about, I just read a headline about it before we started, is about inflation, about going down, and then the trade wars actually working out in the sense that our tariffs are actually beneficial for the government recouping money. BG, I know you're pretty smart. Are you able to talk in like 30 seconds on that? I'm just curious. Is that true? Yeah, I just saw some headlines.
Yeah, I was reading the Wall Street Journal recently, and it's having an impact on inflation, headline inflation, which the Fed is now signaling they may be inclined to actually reduce the federal funds rate, which is significant because that impacts all of us for student loans, vehicles, automotive, and
my
houses.
mortgage.
And then for businesses, it changes what their credit rate is for pursuing new business opportunities. So it's
wait, was Trump right, or did he get lucky? Or was this actually a really good strategy?
It's a little bit of both. I'll say this. It's a little bit of both, right? I guess with respect to the tariffs that have been implemented on the countries that we have actually executed on, it is working. I will say that the Canadian agreement totally fell apart, which is significant because they're our second largest trading partner. So that we'll have to still figure out at the end. But China has been completed, and like I was talking about with you, MR, through the course of this week, it's interesting because it's not in the news anymore. We don't even discuss it. And it's the most significant bill that's been passed with respect to tariffs and inflation since, I would argue, since like 2011 or 2012. It's huge.
Shit, man. You know what else we're not talking about? CK, for your closing comments, are you going to talk about the LA riots and everything?
I wasn't planning on it.
All right. Well, real quick, you want to talk about something else that isn't in the news? Is I haven't seen anything about riots. I don't know if that's because Iran dominated the headlines and everyone forgot about it, or that the Department of Justice says it is going to go after everyone that funds the riots. Where they drop off cement blocks or bricks, pass out the gas masks, or pass out tear gas to throw at the police. All of those things. And all of a sudden, there's just no more riots. Now, there's still protests, and no one on this podcast, and hopefully no one in general, has issue with peaceful protesting. but the riot aspect is definitely reduced. I think that is huge news.
Definitely interesting.
Yeah.
CK, I feel like I'm losing you. All right, so that's probably a good time to wrap it up. BG, give me your closing comments.
All right, closing comments. I haven't read through all of the cases and everything, so I know we'll probably have to do a secondary touch on this stuff. But interestingly enough, one of the other cases they touched was Flood, or however you say it, V versus PLO, which was an international terrorism thing that had transpired. Now, the Supreme Court is saying that there's a legal path for Americans to be able to seek civil restitution in U.S. courts against international violence against citizens. So that's very interesting. I'll be interested to see if terrorist organizations don't like losing money. With respect to other, which you could argue anybody doesn't like losing money. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk that's significant for economics for people who use buy now, pay later, which is a very, very large portion of people in the United States. Specifically for Gen Z, you're looking at 54%, and millennials almost 56% in some cases. Depends on who you look at. Yeah. But I've seen reports as low as like 47 as well, so keep that in mind. Anyway, point being, very significant. FICO scores are now going to be incorporated into buy now, pay later, and there's going to be two separate buy now, pay later model policies.
Dude, that's huge. Oh my gosh.
So this will allow lenders better gauge for repayment reliability, particularly for consumers who previously lacked credit history. And then what that'll do is it'll help with credit building, and we'll see what it'll look like for all of the buy now, pay later providers over time for reporting to credit bureaus. But if you recall, when they instituted buy now, pay later, it was under the guise and premise that none of it would be reportable. And here we are.
Dude, that's wild.
2025.
We may have to actually add that to a full talking point during the podcast, because that is actually pretty crazy stuff.
Yes, it's very, very significant, because a lot of people are going to be impacted either in a positive light because they've made their payments, or a very negative light because they've been late on making their payments.
Oh, yeah. You're going to see some 340 credit scores out there. That's for sure. Dang. Well, thank you, BG, for that. I think that was an excellent closing comment. CK, what do you have for us?
Yeah, just real quick, without opening any new rabbit holes.
Oh gosh.
No. BG talked about lowering the interest rates and potential lower Fed rates. I will, and you asked him, is it lucky or is Trump doing something right? My grade school basketball coach said, "They don't ask how, they ask how many." And all I'll say is, they don't ask how, they ask how many. If it's working, keep doing it.
Love the wisdom. Well, thank you for that one, CK. And thank you, BG. And thank you for everyone that is still listening to this point in the podcast. We really, really appreciate you. So let's wrap it up. And you know what's coming next. Please help support us on the Patreon. We could really use the support. You only have to donate $3 and you can help fund this entire thing. And if honestly you're listening at this point, then you're one of the core people and you probably want to deep down just be like, yeah, $3. That's good. But anyways, thank you all for listening. We really, really appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button, hit like, tell all your friends. Let's see if we can raise the standard of 150 to 200. Also, I just got a design guy. He just designed us stickers. So those of you that have already donated to the Patreon or joined our Patreon, those stickers will be coming out soon. And then then we'll actually have to mail it to you. So maybe a little longer, but they are being made now. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you. And you know what? We hope you have a great rest of your day.